Hey guys, welcome back to another video. If you're new here, I'm Eileen from Homegrown Happiness and I do lots of garden videos here in my suburban no-dig garden. So I'm based in New Zealand and we are coming up to the end of winter. It's going to be spring next week, so I'm going to show you now what's going on in the garden and what I'm planting and sowing. So first up, the broad beans are coming. I love broad beans. I love them for their food and then also for the garden benefits. They're like a super handy plant to have growing because they're a nitrogen fixer. So this means that bacteria in the soil work alongside the plant to fix nitrogen in the roots, and then when the plant breaks down, it'll release the nitrogen into the soil for other plants to take up. So I like to plant broad beans in lots of spaces in my garden because they're just so handy to have. So once I'm finished harvesting the beans, I'll chop the plant at root level and I leave the root ball in the soil, and then the spent broad bean plants I just chop up and use as a green mulch. The front garden is looking lush at the moment. We've had frosty mornings, but then really beautiful days, so things are just springing into life. As the days are getting longer, I can really see a difference in the speed in which things are growing. And this space here is the middle garden. We have a section that's on a bit of like an incline, so we have the bottom level, which is where the front garden is, and it's the best garden in this space. It has the best sun. And then in the middle we have our middle garden, and then at the top, which is where I'm sitting at the moment, it's at the top of our section, we have what I call the top garden. I'm very original with names. Anyway, in the middle garden the garlic is growing quite well. In the winter it just has been establishing its roots and a little bit of greenery, but it didn't get really any sun. But now that we're edging into spring, it's starting to get an hour or two of sun and it's really enjoying it. I also sowed a round of parsnips and carrots here, and I've just protected them with whatever I could find in the shed. This is just to keep the birds off them. The chickens spend quite a bit of time in this garden, but as long as I keep the vulnerable areas covered, they're not too destructive. So now for the top garden, which is where I am at the moment. So it's south facing, which in the southern hemisphere means it does not get much sun, especially in autumn and winter. I planted some broccoli and kale seedlings here a few weeks ago, and they've just started picking up their growth in like the last week, now that they're getting an hour or two of sun again. It's amazing the difference it can make. When we first moved here, the lack of sun was a real issue because I hadn't really tracked the sun properly, and so I was quite late with planting things, and then I wasn't able to harvest things during winter. But I started keeping a record of when I planted and sowed things, and since then I've worked out my own little planting schedule of what I need to plant and by when, if we want to be harvesting when the sun is gone. So gardens can be so unique because of climate and weather and sunshine hours and things obstructing it, and it's quite important, I think, to take note of your own garden and what works and what doesn't, write it down and learn from it, and and make a plan of what works for you. Like these Brussels sprouts fed us during winter even though the garden was totally shaded, and the only reason they could do this though was because I started them in the second month of spring. So then in late spring I planted them out in big pots and then kept them covered with netting to protect them from both the sun and the white butterfly, and then I planted them out in the garden in late summer, and then by the time the sun went away they were already forming sprouts with no issues. Granted, they're a little bit smaller than Brussels sprouts grown in full sun, but I'm totally not complaining. I have some here too in this little section, which was in the same garden, but this is in an area that gets even less sun. It's the worst because by late summer it already drops the sun. But you can see the sprouts are still growing here, even though the plant is much shorter. I have other brassicas here too, like broccoli and cauliflower. The broccoli gave us plenty of side shoots, but you can see now they're all just going to seed because they just don't have any sun, and from such an early stage they stopped having sun. The thing is with brassicas is that the entire plant is edible, so you don't have to wait for it to grow perfect produce. You can use the leaves and the stems and the flowers and the seed pods. Just use your imagination. Now back to the front yard garden, which gets some actual winter sun. This broccoli looks way more normal size than I'm used to. When I'm harvesting my broccoli, I just chop the head off and leave the plant in the ground to produce side shoots. I'm also harvesting some daikon radish and red mustard leaves. my last video I did some seed sowing of the first of my summer seeds, and I'll link that video below. So I just thought I'd do a little bit of an update of how things are going. So my chili has come along nicely, and so has my first round of tomatoes. My eggplant, the Florence purple brown variety, didn't come up at all, and because I sowed quite a fair few amount of seeds, I reckon they were just old seeds. My friend gave me some of her Black Beauty eggplant seedlings, which is great, and also some new eggplant seeds, the variety Listada degandia, and they have already sprouted, and I only sowed them like 9 days ago, so that's awesome. I've popped some kumara, or sweet potato, in water to grow some shoots. They start pushing out shoots from these little pockets, and once the shoots are about 15 centimeters long with roots, then they can go into the garden when it's got warm soil. These can take a while to grow, so time is of the essence. I sowed some lettuce at the beginning of this month too, and they've grown well, but they're a bit densely planted, so I need to pick them out and plant them in bigger pots. I don't want to put them in the garden yet because I don't know exactly where I want to plant them. I also sowed some basil seeds, another round of tomato seeds, and a few spring brassicas. These are Chinese cabbages. So before I replant the lettuce, I soaked the tray of lettuce seedlings in some water and some seaweed tonic. This is just to avoid transplant shock when you move the little vulnerable seedlings. And to replant them, I just loosen the soil with a stick, or a paintbrush in this case, and I make a hole in the soil of the bigger punnets and hold the seedling by the leaves, not the stem, then gently remove it and pop it into the hole. Then gently press the soil around it. I avoid holding the seedling by the stem because they can get really easily damaged. The new punnets could be filled with like a sieved compost, a seed raising mix, or a potting mix. So I'm not going to put these newly planted seedlings into the sun for like a day or two, because whenever you transplant little seedlings like this, there's always going to be a bit of root loss and a bit of stress on the seedlings, so the hot sun beating down on them is not going to help. I planted out my peas that I sowed earlier this month too. I also soaked this tray in seaweed and water first. And now I'm just putting up some netting in between my archways for the peas to climb up. So now I'm grabbing some compost to put on the soil. This compost is super chunky, and I'm not bothering to sieve it or anything. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't, it just depends on my mood. But you can see it's full of goodness for the soil and plenty of worms. And then once the peas are planted, I covered the compost with some mulch and also some netting to keep the birds off. And in between each pea seedling, I popped a few pea seeds in as well. And that's it for this month's garden update. Next month, when spring starts, I'm going to be planting out my potatoes, which I have been sprouting these last few weeks. I'm also going to be sowing some more summer seeds and keep on top of my spring planting. Hope you enjoyed this update. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.